welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I speak with publisher, librarian, and many other things, Cullen Beckhorn. Hope you enjoy. So what's up? You got this anthology?
Yeah, that's kind of the main thing on my mind right now.
What's it called?
Alive Outside.
How do you feel about anthologies?
I like them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Is it still the age of the? I feel like, like 10 years ago there was a lot of anthologies. Are there more or less? Do you think? Am I just out of touch?
Well, I mean, part of the inspiration for making this thing was feeling like there weren't any, or like the heaviest flagship kind of things that really had the most impact for me didn't exist anymore. So,
and what would those be?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Kramer's Ergot is like the easy one to point at, but.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know, thinking about also, Mold Map was one that was exciting that Leomi Sadler was involved with. And that kind of had a very distinct period of time that it was happening. Yeah, Fantagraphics has now going on right now, but it's kind of a different thing.
Yeah, no, I'm just, anthologies are very tricky. They can be, the challenge is making them feel substantial and not throwaway, I find. So I don't know, how do you approach that? What's your methodology?
I mean, that was a big fear with trying to make this thing, was for it not to feel like a magazine in the way that something like Now feels like. And yeah, that I've kind of felt from some of the other things that Fantagraphics has put out. Yeah, I mean, as for the approach, I guess it's just having a clear sense of curation and an idea about what I'm trying to show, and like the links that I'm trying to draw between things. Hopefully makes it come through as a statement in itself.
Well, so what's distinct per se about Alive Outside? Like, what do you think you're trying to do with that? I see that it's designed to obliterate the impending monoculture.
Yeah.
Impending. I thought it was already occurring.
I know it feels like somewhat inescapable sometimes, but the hope is that this is going to set things on a bit of a better track. I don't know. Part of it was kind of feeling like the internet had this. There was a sameness that was happening in art, just through kind of what looks good on a screen, or compared to what looks good in print, and just the way that things proliferate through online mediums. Everything was kind of starting to look the same to me. The things that I was seeing through Tumblr or Instagram, which is where I'm able to see a lot of art.
It's funny. Yeah, there's. How do I? It's like, I would agree that there is a kind of homogeny emerging, but at the same time, there. Visually, like, I feel, obviously this anthology is pretty diverse in some ways.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how to pinpoint, but at the same time, it's like there's a culture there. I don't know if it's a monoculture, But it's not like suddenly I turn the page and there's like a Marvel looking glossy bullshit going on. So I find that I don't know if in the war of monocultures it's just about preference, not the mono aspect. I'm having a hard time articulate what I mean, but because you can look at Instagram and see like quite a divergent display of things. But it's maybe the disparate nature that is more troubling than the mono. It's like a depth thing also often, not the. It's a very difficult topic because in one sense, you would think we're living in some sci-fi film in the future, the way we're talking about it, where everyone is like, they're just like gray people who look exactly the same and they wear the same clothing. But we also have a very cacophonous world where nothing feels unified. So I don't know how to square that circle.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of like the mission of curating a collective book is to try to create links maybe in places where you might not expect to find them, and look at different corners of what's happening in art. This thing is definitely very interested in comics, and that's kind of where my publishing got its start. But it also looks at a lot of things that aren't comics, or or maybe artists that are inspired by comics, but what they're doing is ending up somewhere totally different.
Right. And do you feel it succeeded in that sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty bonkers thing, and it pulls from things like underground cartoonists of the 80s and 90s, and putting them on the same page with complete outsiders and folk artists, and in a way where it's clear that they're drawing on some similar inspirations, or finding or even ending up with a similar language of visual communication, even if they might be coming from different places.
Yeah, no, it looks rather exciting. The last anthology I recall you putting out was the one, a long time ago. At least the one I know of. It was, the name of it.
Yeah, the Unknown Power was the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of in a similar way. This is coming from a similar place. Although that even though the production was kind of through the roof on that project, it was almost imagined as kind of a zine that would accompany an art show. But then the pandemic happened, and the art show really only got to be installed once. So there was only kind of one incarnation of that, and then the book had more of a life really than I even expected for it to.
Nice. And that goes on sale when? Is it already on sale?
Yeah. I just announced pre-orders for it, and yeah, that's rolling out right now, and the books are going to be shipping in November. Kind of probably mid-November.
Wonderful. I see you have 1,200 copies. That's very nice.
Yeah, biggest print run of a book that I've done like this. I mean, biggest book that I've ever done for sure. And part of the reason for pre-sales is just so that I can get everything and put it into my warehouse space here, and ship out as much of it as possible before I have to put the books into whatever I have left over into storage.
So you got a warehouse. You're in, what are you in Oregon?
I'm in Washington.
Washington.
In rural Washington.
Is that where you were born?
No, I was born in Hawaii.
Really?
My parents lived there for a while, but then they thought that was no place to have children. So decided to sail across the ocean.
Why is that when I think of the phrase, this is no place to have children, I think of like New York City. But why is Hawaii not a place for
I mean,
having children?
I guess for them, my mom was a first grade teacher, and they were looking at the school system and kind of how the kids were being educated out there, and it was very very free form, and lots of, I think also maybe the culture that they were a part of, there was lots of drugs and degeneracy, and they were hoping that I wouldn't fall into that.
And now look at you.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Living in the forest with a bunch of hippies.
Yeah, is that what's going on? I remember last time, I think we've only met once, but
yeah,
it felt substantial. It was on my front yard. I still live in that house, and
amazing.
I couldn't recall the.
Yeah, I think my situation is basically the same.
Yeah.
As when I saw you then, I'm living on this property outside of the city in a swamp. That's like a collectively owned kind of like circus school meets eco village.
Does it have a name?
It's called the Lookout Arts Quarry.
And did you start it?
No, I jumped on board maybe 8 years ago or 9 years ago now. They were looking for more. They were looking for more people to buy in, basically, to raise some money to run electricity to another part of the property. And I was already living here in a school bus that's kind of very minimally remodeled into a living space. And so, yeah, for me, it was a clear, easy way to invest in the property that would also mean that I'd have electricity where I was living.
And you enjoy that kind of structure?
It's working out for now, but I think now I'm nearly 40 years old, and I feel like I'm sort of want for a little bit more casual comforts.
What would that be, like heat and like HVAC, like AC?
Man, yeah, just right now I'm my personal space is heated with wood.
Nice.
And which is great, but it's a very small space. Heating with wood takes a lot of time and energy, and in the winter, boy, it gets pretty dark out here. So it can be an all-consuming thing. Just kind of keeping a baseline of comfort.
So how did you get to? Do you know how you got where you got? In other words, how you got into you're 40. You're in this very interesting quarry. You heat yourself with wood. You're born in Hawaii. But between all of that, I'm curious to know the philosophical trajectory, or if it's kind of been a consistent, like I don't know what your parents believe or how they raised you, but is it like is there a through line there? Like it's very, very consistent, or were you like a 25-year-old finance bro and then it all collapsed around you? And then, what is the story?
Yeah. I mean, I guess my dad was always a bit of a rogue. So I have that as like a inspiration, maybe.
Do you rogue in the same way?
I'd say so. Yeah.
That's kind of paradoxical in a weird way, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, I think I think about it having just had a child. I think about it because I think about rogue decisions, and I probably will make some. And then, but I wonder, like, will he just do the opposite, or similarly rogue, which is in line with what I'm doing? So there's there's a funny dance there.
Yeah, it's with no conscious with no conscious choice really. I think it's kind of a nature versus nurture question maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And or just it's there wasn't like a maybe a desire to rebel, but just an instinct to rebel maybe from things happening around me.
Well, also the term rogue is a kind of relative term. And perhaps your father's just correct in his worldview, and the world isn't, and so he appears to be one.
Yeah,
And maybe you are as well. So sometimes people make very fundamentally human decisions. In this society, it seems completely radical.
mm-hmm.
So,
For sure.
So you've been a rogue. You've been in that position
and I've been like being identified as a radical for long before I self-identified in that way. So yeah, shortly after leaving my leaving the Beckhorn estate where I grew up on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington, I ended up in Bellingham and it quickly dropped out of school, realizing it wasn't really for me. And
high school or college?
College. Yeah.
Right. I guess you can't drop out of. Yeah, you can't drop out of high school legally. I don't think. Too young.
No, you can drop out of high school at some point. I think once you turn 16, you can leave school. And many of my peers had done that. I was in a class of 130 something entering elementary school, but by the time we got to high school graduation, I think there were only 53 people that graduated. So not a high graduation rate out there.
Got issues
in the Appalachia of the Northwest.
Do you know fundamentally what you're rebelling against? Is it very clear and logical and can be articulated?
In some cases, yeah. But I guess I don't want to frame myself as that being like a primary motivating force.
No, right.
I think I'm more interested in what can be created rather than like what I'm against or something.
Well, that's healthy. I think it's evident by your output too. You do many things and quite frequently. So I think anti-dispositions can only get you so far.
Yeah.
I don't really think they work in the long term.
Yeah, it's a fun way to find commonality sometimes, though.
Short term, perhaps, but
yeah.
I think in a sense, anti is very divergent, and being for something is very convergent, and so you kind of end up in similar places when there's unification to being for something. I think there's a fractious quality to being simply against. But it's interesting to me. I think in some ways you live some people's fantasies, even the idea of heating your lodgings by wood perhaps might be. So,
yeah, it sounds pretty fanciful, but man, in the dead of winter when it's like, when you have like 3.5 hours of actual daylight and like that has to be used exclusively for figuring out like, how can I get my wood stash together for the next, 20.5 hours to keep myself comfortable. It loses a bit of romance then.
Sure. Well, and obviously you have some level of pragmatism. You use social media. You have a nice website. You are organized enough to make many anthologies that are complex. Mm-hmm. So, do you feel a tension?
Class out here.
Say again.
We're trying to have some class out here.
Yeah, exactly. But do you? is that just a necessity, or is that something you feel, like in alignment with? Because for me personally, early on, Tumblr was a means to an end. It's not really something that stuck to me. Like, I don't really like social media very much, and there's some immature part of me that isn't willing to just embrace it more, for its pragmatic ends.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to see the contrast, obviously. Like, you're heating your lodgings by wood, but you obviously know how to maintain a website and social media and stay connected to people via a very technological method.
Yeah, I know. That is kind of my window into a lot of social community and arts based community is through the internet or through social media. And so, yeah, I see it as important in that way. And I really value some of the connections that I've been able to make through that space. But also it's kind of figuring out what I have to say and what fits in different for each platform, because each platform kind of has its own I don't know. It's like the medium is the message. Each platform has its own thing that it can facilitate, and I'm sort of trying to figure out how to use these tools to actually equal real connection with people. And yeah, so it's a navigation. I don't know. And sometimes it works and sometimes it's like a bit fumbly. Ultimately, like, I want to have as much control over my voice and my message as possible. So, yeah, looking recently, I created a Substack just because
I saw that.
It seems like the best way where I can have as much control as possible. And people can choose to see what I have to say or not. And it's not so much based on trying to game an algorithm.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, it obviously offers a level of control that's unprecedented.
Yeah. Yeah. So that feels attractive to me. And then ultimately, like, I like having a website as just a sort of a playground for how I can present stuff and yeah, find different ways to put things up there and make connections between things.
And it seems like a lot of your practice does revolve around working with other people.
Oh, I mean, yeah, as a publisher, that's a big part of it. I also do a lot of work in like events and arts curation and host residencies and things like that. So it's super social, and I really love. That's the thing that I enjoy the most is just getting to know people and kind of be a witness to their process and support in some way.
Have you ever engaged in very solitary practices? Are those appealing at all? Like, I can't remember. I mean, I know you play music, right?
Yeah.
Which is communal.
It can be, but really that's funny that you mentioned that, because music has been such a solitary thing for me in the last few years. I'm kind of I'm coming to a realization that actually performing music is not so much where I am inspired. I've never been a recording artist, and I've always been pushed to perform by sort of just an expectation. But I realized that I kind of love just doing it for myself more than anything.
And I cannot recall. Do you make comic books?
I've done some comics in the past. I've never made like a comic book, I would say. I've made zines. I draw cartoons. sometimes, but more so, publishing has become more of an outlet for that. Bookmaking has always been like something that I've done since I was a child, and as you know, I realized that as long as I've been drawing and writing together, I've been stapling those things together also, and making my own little booklets. But kind of when I started Neoglyphic Media, and publishing really became the focus, I became more interested in what I could do with other people's work, than trying to put out my own drawing and writing.
Was that the initial intent?
I mean, that was sort of what I was doing at the time. When I started that project, I was doing a lot more writing and drawing of my own, but kind of as I've leaned into it, it's become much more interesting for me to, I think of it like, I think of it kind of in a musical way. I've always found myself most comfortable as a bass player, and I think in publishing, I step into that role of being a bass player a lot. Not looking to be a front instrument, but just to provide a support that's foundational for someone else to be able to take a solo on or something.
Mm-hmm. So there's a quality of service and community within your practice. It seems like it's central.
Yeah. I think it's a way that I understand how to be generous, I guess.
Yeah. It's an interesting impulse that initially doesn't seem, even with running a gallery, like from the outside. And honestly, after running a gallery, I think I understand that I'm not cut out for that. But there is something really nice about just bringing people together, but also certain concepts, simply put, or aesthetics. Like it's just, there's something appealing about it. It's not anything deeply profound to talk about. It's just making these connections and facilitating things can be, when you get older, I don't know, it just, at least for me, that just becomes more and more appealing.
I think also I'm a fan, and I get excited. I get excited by when I see something that I'm moved by, and so that was something that I found also. When I started Neoglyphic Media and I was starting to present my own work and other people's work through that publishing platform, that I was pretty uncomfortable talking about my own work and presenting it, but I was really easily able to talk about how someone else's work moved me, and be able to like elevate that and talk about that in a way where I was showing, able to show someone like why it was exciting to me.
Right. And do I recall you ran a library of some kind at some point?
Yeah, for many years that was kind of the focus of my work as a editor and curator, I guess.
What was that called again?
It was just called Alternative Library.
Right.
Yeah, and it started with a big focus on comics and experimental comics, underground, and self-published work. But then it came to also encompass other underground publishing and radical publishing. And actually I still am pretty active with that project, but it's taken on a different form lately. Without being a storefront, it's now functioning more like, more as just another publishing project. But it's more dedicated towards social critique and propaganda, I guess.
Propaganda. Do you think art should be do you believe in art that is propaganda? Do you think that's where art should end up ultimately?
I think that most art that takes I'm not super interested in a lot of art that functions as propaganda, I guess.
Yeah.
I like it when someone has a political message, I guess. But it seems like a lot of art that attempts to portray a political message is just uninteresting to me.
Yeah.
But
No, I find that a very interesting topic. It's why I ask. And I assume that, there can be a clearer division that allows for both things to be as powerful as they can be, categorically speaking. And I do find there's a very awkward marriage that is increasingly so that can occur between the two. I especially find in like college art, like I was looking at my old school's like upcoming class senior theses, and they were just like so ham-fisted with their apparently profound opinions about how things should change. And the way I often talk about it is if there is a conversation between you and the work of art, no one wants to talk to someone who just thinks they're smarter and knows what would make the world better and has no interest in your feedback. Whereas great works of art are pretty much inexhaustible because they stay open.
yeah,
Propaganda is a closed and shut door that facilitates something else other than what I would consider to be the transcendent potential of art making. So that's the only reason I ask is like, perhaps you don't see it that way, which is fine.
I see propaganda maybe in like the attempt with propaganda is to like distill an idea down to its most succinct and like definite form. So like I think about the manifesto as a literary form is actually a super interesting mode to work in because it's asking someone to make their idea of the world as concise, as clear, and as inarguable as possible. And so I like to read things that are that, and I even like to write things that are that. But I think it functions in a very different way from art most of the time. But then I think there's particular examples of things that sort of like tread that boundary that are like I think about there's a piece called Bolo Bolo that I find really interesting that is basically an anarcho-syndicalist, like globalist manifesto, but it's written in this kind of way that's self-aware and a bit humorous.
How do you spell that? I'm curious.
It's just BOLO apostrophe BOLO. I think it was originally written in German.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Very interesting. Interesting visuals too. Yeah, that's a good.
So it's a rare fusion where like propaganda can become also an artistic statement, but I think of them as usually pretty divergent forms. And so, that's sort of the reason that I oftentimes will publish some things as alternative library and will publish other things as Neoglyphic media, is like looking at kind of what's the intention here. Is the intention to have like an open-ended conversation that art can allow to open up, or is the intention more to be as like a tool of propaganda?
Yeah, no, I think that's a smart division. It's like keeping those chambers compartmentalized so they can fire off as powerfully as they can, and letting the connections be obvious, like you're putting them out. So there's a thread, but it's not so. I don't know how to word it, but it can be very off-putting. I don't know how to, like, I guess I'm pretty, having known many artists, I really don't care about their opinions about things, to be honest, mostly.
Yeah.
I'm just very visual about art, and
Mhm.
that's why I'm there. But
Yeah.
it is weird though. If someone writes something, I'm much more like, they could write a manifesto or a political message, and I would be far more open to it. Perhaps that's just my orientation towards these things.
You mean you'd be more open to it if it was coming from an artist that you enjoyed?
If it was written, yeah, I don't even know why. Like, I mean, the futurists are very interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, futurism is a very interesting example. Obviously, the manifesto, compared to the visual representation of it,
Right.
it can
Totally.
be. I don't even know. Like, there's moments where it syncs up, but there's also kind of dissonant moments, and I
Mhm.
suppose because artists are very hard to unify, I think that's why I find them interesting. And I find these challenges of bringing them together, even in anthologies, to be exciting, because you're trying to take things that are kind of demagnetized. Like, I feel like artists are always resisting the center of something, and perhaps that's why
Yeah.
anarchy is appealing and should be appealing to all artists. I think,
Mhm.
for a multitude of reasons. But I do recall that is part of the discussion on my front lawn, was the nature of anarchy in its different forms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I became kind of an outspoken anarchist at some point, and I remember you had um, you had an old friend that was there that was like, I think he described himself as an anarcho-capitalist.
Yep.
And
Yep. I've known him since I was like 5 years old. Yeah.
yeah, we had a pretty good conversation. And a lot of people would say, anarcho-capitalism is like not truly anarchism. Um, and I would tend to agree, but it's a fun debate. Um,
How would you, since it is a thing, and since I find that the definitions around it are very, very vague for people who don't know about it, what would be the most concise way to explain anarchy?
I mean, just the word itself just means like to create a society without government. Um,
Right.
so if like the way I like to think about it is just thinking about how we choose to have power in our lives, or how we choose to offer power over our lives to others. And in a lot of cases, people can consent to giving power over their lives to other people. But I guess I would just say that government oftentimes imposes power on people's lives, and anarchists just generally believe that like a society without government is going to be the best, because then we don't have anyone imposing. There's no like legitimate authority over people's lives. But I mean, also to the critics out there, there's people are always asking for anarchists to like explain a system out of this kind of aspirational desire for there not to be a system.
Right.
So
No, that's helpful. I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward.
yeah.
But how do you think that manifests in practicality, right? Like, obviously you met my friend. He lives a very different life than you.
Yeah.
He's pursued very different avenues, and yet that word finds its way in there. You live in a situation that,
it's like the appeal of anarchy that sort of like leads him or leads others to to seek to identify with things there. There's a lot of things that are appealing about like the utopian prospect of anarchy, which is like always, I would say, is always something to kind of strive towards, but never something to be ultimately achieved.
right. And I suppose that relationship to monoculture is, you would never end up with one. organically, or when anarchy was basically, you can't really, I was going to say when it's in effect, but it's kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like now that we're talking about this, I realized that in my sort of pitch line for Alive Outside, I think I described it as a like a wood pulp manifesto.
A wood pulp manifesto.
In some way. Yeah, just referring to the fact that it's made out of paper.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to being something that's experienced online. It's, what did I called it? A wood pulp manifesto for the messy comedy of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like, I think it's funny to present something like that as a manifesto where it's like, it's clearly not. But I hope that people will approach it with that in mind. Looking to take some kind of, I want people to try to find a political meaning within it, but for that to be like an open discussion too.
Right. Yeah, perhaps there's lowercase p and uppercase p when it comes to political. I try to sort that out a lot, and it's in my own head. And I don't really know how to approach it, because I wouldn't ever claim that I'm a political person in the sense that I don't frame things and think of things primarily through that lens. And I never really have, like, since I was a small boy. It's always been very mythological or religious in some sense, where it's just about like these maybe perhaps invisible forces pushing things around and contending with them in a far more oblique way than perhaps a manifesto would typically yield, which is kind of more head on. But yeah, that's making me reconsider just the nature of the manifesto and what it means. I wrote one in college, but it was like very Dada nonsense.
Okay. Yeah,
it was about hamburgers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's oftentimes the best manifestos in my mind are the ones that advocate for like complete absurdity and and like nonsense.
I would love to, what's funny is parenting, because it's there's a lot of analogous things going on, right? Like you become the authority, and of course you're an authority. You're raising like a blob that is completely dependent on you, right? So you start to see how your ideas really, really play out. Like you can, I've met people who claim all sorts of, they're liberal, they're conservative, etc. I don't really care until I see them parent, because that's like a super responsibility where you get to really see.
You watch how they deal with authority.
Yeah. So I'm actually very curious if you're willing to speak about it, but like having parents who might be more, on the anarchy side of things, like what does that look like?
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say that my parents were on the anarchy side of things in any way at all.
Oh, okay. Just the roguishness of your, gotcha.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, my brother and I were given a bit of a feral upbringing in some ways, but also we were definitely living under a strong-fisted dictatorship.
Nice.
Yeah. So I can't really speak to that. I mean, aside from, I guess, my experience living, since then, I've lived in various different communal living situations with a lot of hippies, and seen much more anarchistic approaches to parenting and like free reign given to the kids, and with various results.
Of course. Yeah, it's kind of open to all results when you play
I
that
find
game.
myself such a so much more accepting of discipline when I'm feeling bothered by my landmates' children.
What do you mean accepting of discipline?
Oh, just like I'm like, gosh, someone's got to create some
Right,
boundaries
right,
for
right.
children. Like, this is just absolutely insane. No one can get anything done around here.
Well, that's what's funny to me is like I keep imagining you again, who's at least from the outside, you seem very prolific and put together, but in these settings that are a little more granola and chaotic, it's a kind of it's a beautiful vision
Yeah,
for me. For me,
yeah, it's definitely some space has to be taken. Because that is, but also like being around families and children has been like a huge part of my experience uh, and really exciting to be able to see that kind of developmental process and be inspired by that too.
of course. So I'm kind of curious. You said you're 40 now?
No, I'm getting there,
You're
but
getting well.
not
I
quite 40
suppose
yet.
I'm approaching it at some speed as well.
Yeah.
But
I recently started identifying as old, so
oh, interesting.
yeah.
I mean, I think just warming your spot with fire is probably that's all it takes. Doesn't matter what age.
Yeah.
You're officially old. But can you understand the trajectory of neoglyphic media? Do you know kind of like how you would grow it, what it looks like, or are you less oriented towards planning that kind of thing?
I mean, I love making I love making a 5-year plan, but like I almost always I mean, every year I look at my 5-year plan and have to completely revise it based on what happened within the last year. So in some ways, I have an idea of where I'm going with publishing, what kind of stories I want to tell, connections I want to make, people I want to work with, but also, it unfolds before me in unexpected ways, and one relationship will lead me to another relationship, and or one project will lead me to another project. And so
Is there any medium shifts you're kind of excited about? Like
I mean, I mean, for the last couple of years, I've been working a lot with a risograph, and that's been fun to learn about and experiment with. And I really became quite a side quest that spun out in way further than I could have imagined, and recently I've picked up a couple offset presses that are in similar states of dysfunction. So I see that side quest like further expanding as I'm like tinkering with more machines, and also like meeting some older printmakers that are still at it, and seeing that as a possible future for me, being this continuing to lean into the mechanical side of print reproduction, but also that's not the most interesting thing for me either. I'm glad that I've been able to work my way through that, and that I do have a bit of a mechanical inclination, but I'm so much more excited about the curatorial things and the editorial things. Those avenues, I hope, can become more of a focus as one machine gets to be running with some reliability.
So in respect to daily activities, are you mostly connecting dots and kind of operating in a managerial sense, like just making sure this is coming in and emailing this person to make sure this comes in. What is the what does the daily look like when you're juggling all these different projects?
Yeah, I guess it's a lot of communication. Yeah, emailing folks and just making sure that things show up at the right time and things get mailed to where they need to be. Yeah, that's a big part of it. And then also just getting into the studio and playing around, designing and printing things, and just experimenting with different ways of layering color has been a big playpen for me in the last couple of years. I'm currently running 13 colors on an old GR risograph machine, single color. So it's kind of this the GR 3770 is the machine, and it seems like it's kind of this very prolific machine. There's a lot of them out there, and no one really seems to like them. And so there's been parts galore, and people getting rid of these machines regularly, and people getting rid of drums for them. So I've ended up with this kind of ridiculous color palette, more colors than anyone else I know who's running a risograph. And I'm just kind of trying to keep everything in use and keep finding interesting projects that can do that.
A Live Outside is not entirely Rezo, right?
No, in fact, yeah, it's been a bit of a journey with that one, figuring out how it was going to be printed. Initially, we had imagined putting it together in a piecemeal manner with some sections being Rezo printed and other sections being offset printed on a web press, which is like a old newspaper press. But with paper shortages during the pandemic, we started working on the book. Me and Mark Bell, who's the co-editor, who's an amazing artist from Canada. So he and I started working on this book in 2021 maybe, amidst lockdowns, and there was a lot of shifting that was happening with the paper industry has changed substantially in that time. A ton of papers have been discontinued. A lot of print shops are shutting down. So like the industry is changing like right in front of us right now, in a big way, faster than it ever has. And so eventually, for a number of different reasons, things became just not feasible to do close to home. And now pretty much the entire book has been outsourced to a Chinese printer, who put it together. And then just a few extraneous materials are being Rezo printed in my home studio. Fascinating.
Yeah, I'm working with a printer from Alibaba.com right now.
Okay.
And it's been wonderful. But
yeah, what I found was like I could not get at some point I couldn't get the local offset printer to even return my calls. Once they saw the scale of the project that I wanted to do, and all the different kind of tricked out elements with spot colors and things cut to different trim sizes, I stopped getting called back. But yet at the same time, I had this woman from this Chinese print company that was hitting me up every week, being like, "Hey, if you're still interested, let me know. We're ready to receive your files." And I didn't want to take the project to China, but they were eager to take it on, and I couldn't get anyone local who wanted to even talk to me about it. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you ask something on Alibaba.com, they're going to hit you up every 3 days. So they definitely pursue, and it's nice. And Yeah, that's just the reality of printing. I mean, I got some quotes for books from various places, and it was just I couldn't self-publish it on my own. So, I mean, that's interesting to hear that reality. Honestly, it's kind of inspiring to see that. Like the book I'm printing is very simple. I kept it simple so I could communicate simple things. But it sounds like you're dealing with something really complex there. So I'm
Yeah,
fascinated to see those results.
totally. Yeah, I think for the most part, it's worked out. It's worked out pretty well, and I'm I expect I'll take other projects to this same printer in the future. Um, but I also am so it's been really hard for me to release control
Sure,
in
sure, sure.
these ways, and I'm already thinking about how I can do the next project in a way that I can have more control. Whether it's an anthology project or a big or just a large ambitious project with a single artist or whatever that ends up being. I'm wanting to do more and more close to home, and just be able to have control over the way things are printed and produced.
Yeah, control is a very, very interesting thing. You know, for me, I've had undulating levels of grace and control, and I'm increasingly moving towards grace out of necessity. But then you kind of get into this interesting thing of like discernment, discerning what you can control, what you can't control within your finite lifespan. So the DIY impulse can lead to a kind of control freak impulse, which I think I had for a bit. It can be very isolating. And then I realized, you know what? I got to learn to work with publishers who are going to make mistakes. And then I have to communicate better and also just, develop effectively a relationship, because if you think about the miracle of making something not without any mistakes, without any typos, without any, this layer got turned off accidentally, it's pretty insane. It's like an insane feat that many have accomplished, obviously. But in my experience, there's almost always one little thing that I notice wrong with a book that no one else is going to care about. And that keeps me making them, I think.
Yeah, I know. I so easily get locked into a perfectionist mindset, or just like a pattern of fussiness that'll have me stuck on something for way longer than I need to be, and just to cast it aside. I think about a project that I created a number of years ago that it was finished, and I was thinking about reprinting an entire section of it, and it was the artist's partner at the time was like, "Nope, you are done, buddy. This book is finished. Like, nobody cares other than you at this point."
Wait, the artist said that to you?
It was the artist's girlfriend.
Oh, okay, okay.
Who was advocating for the thing to just be finished. They're like, "You've done enough."
I think there's something there's many funny paradoxes in art making, but there's like that last 1% of finishing thing that really matters to an artist and might even make it great. Yeah. But no one actually can like consciously detect it or care who's a viewer.
Right.
And then there's a phase where you simultaneously have to believe that, so that you really kind of like finish the thing. But then there's stuff like that runs completely contrary, where you have to release that sense of control and just kind of be like, okay, that 1% I'm trying to perfect maybe actually doesn't matter. But then the next project you have to pretend it matters again. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's this weird, I always think of it as a piston. There's like this strange back and forth that occurs that allows you to make something. And it's almost schizophrenic in a weird way.
I mean, I'm very excited I'm seeing there's a whole younger generation of artists in New York right now, the like New York, Philly area that are putting stuff out. They're just publishing stuff at a much faster rate than I've seen a lot of people approach underground publishing with, and it's kind of this essential need to just create something and move on to the next thing that is really inspiring for me right now. Just seeing that and seeing that as a counterpoint to the preciousness that I've approached this project with, having like so much attention to detail and so much fussiness and editing of files and changing colors and then seeing these things that ultimately, like a lot of the time, there's a lot of charm in the imperfection and things that make it through to printing that I find really attractive.
Right. Yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah, so I'm sort of like trying to take a cue from the younger generation right now and have a little less preciousness in the way that I treat each thing.
Yeah, it's hard because there's an increasing frivolity in terms of visual imagery. So there's this pressure to make every physical object count because it's almost like there's a war, as you mentioned with the in your little write-up there. There's kind of like this wood pulp war between the screen and so that can feel pretty lofty.
No, I mean, yeah, and I want things that are being put in print to have, right now it also seems like there's so much that's being printed that when something is put into print, it immediately gains more importance or more like credibility. But some of that gets lost with just the volume of print that's currently coming out. Like the reading public is maybe smaller than it has been in the last 10 years. Like the reading public is a shrinking number, but the volume of works being published is like higher than it's ever been. So there's a lot to compete with in that world too. And I want to have someone look at the things that I'm making and notice the care that's put into them, and be able to have sort of a credibility to the things that I'm touching, has a certain level of attention that's put on them.
Of course. Well, that being said, people got to go out and buy Live Outside, $55, shipping November 2nd, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, probably a little later than that.
Okay, as is natural.
Yeah.
You got any exclusive promo codes you'd like to create on the fly?
Oh, I don't even know how that kind of thing works.
I'm kidding. What else we got? Anything else people should be buying?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. Well, I can say whether you buy it or not, Matthew Thurber is an incredible artist, and I've been working on a project with him for the last year. We're coming up on our year anniversary of both the birth of his baby, Esso, and also the birth of his new comic book series, Looking for the Cat? Yeah.
Nice. That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm in the process of designing and printing his 4th issue of that right now. Yeah, I don't know. Excited to keep working with Matthew on that. He's a pretty ferocious creative person.
Seems that way.
Like, always working on something new. So whether it's comics or making films, or learning to play the violin, he's active.
That's how it looks. All right, so Neoglyphic Media.
That's what they call it.
People got to buy it.
Yeah,
people can go out there. There's tons of stuff. Pulp, wood pulp, probably mostly wood pulp.
Mostly
Maybe-
wood pulp products. Yeah.
Maybe there's some. What is this? A CD? Is that a vinyl?
Yeah, I've done some CDs. I just did a cassette J card for an artist, so that'll be stuff that is also coming out with Neoglyphic, kind of in collaboration with artists.
Can people just show out to the Lookout Arts Quarry and find you?
I'm easy to find on the internet, and it's best to hit me up in advance rather than just show up.
Gotcha.
But I'm here a lot of the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you can find me in the weeds.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, groovy. Thanks, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
As always, music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. I've been a little behind getting them out every 2 weeks or so instead of every week, but I'll get it back. Thank you for your patience. Have a good week.